Donna, for inviting me. And if I look familiar to some of you, it's probably because I'm usually out in the audience at these things. I've been coming to these for a long time. And that part where we just stood up and talked about what we were doing, that's how this show happened. Was from somebody from the AAAS standing up and saying they were looking for artists. So please do it. It worked out. So I was planning tonight to talk a little bit about scientific versus artistic methods as a way of approaching the truth. But I went and talked to a friend about this presentation, and he asked me to give him the very, very, very short version. So I said, well, what it kind of boils down to is that science gives you the facts and art gives you the feels. So to give you an extremely simple example, science can show you the AIDS virus. Art can show you the experience of the disease. But obviously, that's an extremely simple, stark example. Most of life, most of art, most of science is not that simple. There's kind of an old cliche that life is a comedy to those who think and a tragedy to those who feel. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But if we say that, I mean, we all think and feel, usually at the same time. So if we say science is about facts and art is about feelings, that really does justice to neither one. And if we look at a topic like climate change, where the facts are overwhelming, and yet people argue about it all the time and have such very strong feelings, it's clear that more than facts, more than data are needed. I think we're all in this room tonight because we think that art and science can and do and should work together to help us understand the world better. And I think the two together are much more powerful than either one alone. So I brought a team with me tonight. There's my artistic colleagues from the Voyage of Discovery show. There's Jessica Beals, say hi, and Ellen Weiss. And I brought two scientists, as one does. Dr. Miriam Goldstein, marine biologist, and Dr. Bethany Brookshire, better known as the blogger Psycurious. So Bethany and Miriam are gonna pass around some painted Petri dishes that are similar to the ones in the show, because I think it's nice to be able to see and feel the work up close a little bit. So while you look at the art, I would like you to think a little bit about how both art and science can show you things that are not visible, not obvious to the naked eye. And I'd also like you to think about how, as you're passing these from hand to hand, you're adding your own microbes to that Petri dish, so that at the end, we will have our own sort of Dazer microbiome artwork that we all created together. So over the last year, as I was researching and preparing for the Voyage of Discovery show with Ellen and Jessica, I've been thinking a lot about how art helps us approach science and helps us think and talk about science in ways that go beyond data. And we conceived the show originally around the idea of a voyage, kind of like Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle, but not a historical thing, just more of a current day trip on a research vessel, making observations, collecting specimens, and analyzing them. And we were really excited by some of the discoveries that were coming out of the Arctic and Antarctic regions. And scientists seem to be finding new things all the time and finding species in places where they'd never been seen before. But as we read more and more about this, the overwhelming story was of warming, climate change. So our focus in creating art for the show gradually shifted to how climate change was affecting the poles. And besides looking at lots of articles about Arctic warming, we also looked at other people who were making art around these topics. And two of the key ones in shaping my ideas were Olafur Eliasson's installation, Your Waste of Time, and James Balog's film, Chasing Ice. So Eliasson, who is a Danish and Icelandic artist, shipped some big chunks of an Icelandic glacier to New York last summer and exhibited them at MoMA in an air-conditioned pop-up space. And I mean, this is kind of insane to actually ship pieces of, it's apparently an 800-year-old glacier, and create this little space and burn a lot of fossil fuel to keep it from melting. But I mean, and as you can see, I didn't even see it in person, and it's not even that particularly impressive to look at. However, I became kind of obsessed with this piece of art, and it was especially just by the name what does he mean by your waste of time? So one of the things that I learned was hearing about glaciology, about ice science, was that you can, looking at the chemical makeup of air bubbles within samples of ice can tell us a lot about what was going on in the atmosphere hundreds or even thousands of years ago. So when Eliason says the glacier installation is your waste of time, does he mean what? We're just sort of wasting time looking at it. It's just a thing for tourists to do on, a summer day. Does he mean we're wasting time dealing with it? That the Arctic is already melting and that it's basically too late? Or does he mean that we're wasting time itself? That we're just throwing away history, discarding the past? And looking at that piece of art was the first time I ever thought of ice as a thing holding history. And that was really the result of seeing the art together with reading about the science. And looked at that way, letting those glaciers melt is not really that different from cutting down a giant redwood or blowing up the Buddha's Bamiyan. So a similar thing with Balog, James Balog, Chasing Ice. If you guys haven't seen this movie, has everybody seen this movie? So if you haven't, Netflix it, it's awesome. He's a National Geographic photographer. He works on a project called the Extreme Ice Project. And what he did was set up a series of cameras with timers to take pictures of glaciers in 5 different countries in fixed intervals over a year. And then he went around with a crew and uploaded the results. And I mean, these images are just incredibly powerful because most people will never get a chance to see glaciers up close. They're amazingly beautiful, and the scale is just so incredible. It's hard to grasp. But it's really the extent of the loss is just gut punching. And you can see there the line where he's showing what that glacier was like the same time the previous year. So he used cameras to take hundreds of images of the same thing from the same place at the same intervals. He was basically doing an experiment, holding all those things constant so that he could isolate that one thing, the change in the extent of the ice. And that scientific rigor is one of the things that gives the film power as a work of art. Because I think without that context, they can just be beautiful pictures. But without those pictures, it can just be numbers on a page. And this is also, I mean, Diane Burko, who's going to speak later, doing very similar work with some of her pictures from Antarctica and the Arctic. So one of the things we tried to do with our art in Voyage of Discovery was to make visible some of the aspects of climate change that are not so obvious to people. For example, if you tell people that a change of 2 degrees in average temperature over a period of years is catastrophic, it's pretty hard to convince people of that because we all know what a 2-degree change in temperature is like, and it's really not dramatic. So we tried to make that a little more visible, a little more real. If you have a change of 2 degrees in the Arctic, a lot more ice melts than usual, and it refreezes more slowly than usual. So that makes the growing season for plants a little bit longer. And both of those things change the albedo, or the reflectiveness, of the Earth at the poles. Areas that were almost all white become green with plants or dark with open water. And that creates a feedback loop that leads to even more melting and therefore even more warming. And that was what we were showing in this piece. It's called waning albedo. It's kind of definitely hard to get the scope of this because it's curved and it's 30 feet long. But anyway, it's that shift from the pristine white of the ice and snow to gradually darker and more vegetal surface. And that's also the subject of Ellen Weiss's print series called Polar Shift. It's that gradual change of colors, signaling a more profound transformation than just the ordinary change of seasons. Because the Arctic is actually changing color, maybe permanently. These are called core, drill, and spill. And they were mostly made out of recycled plastic bags, some of which were donated by people who worked at the AAAS because we ran out. And they're showing layers that scientists are drilling through to get core samples. So the first one is an ice sample, and you're looking at all the strata with different colors and textures, telling that story about the ice. And with drill and spill, you see the drill going through the ice and snow down to plants, and then soil, and then to the ancient oil all the way underneath. And of course, the fact that warming in the Arctic may lead to more oil drilling is a whole other story and may yet lead to more warming. So when the ocean is warming, new species move in. Scientists have been finding all kinds of creatures far from home. And Jessica's series of paper and wire sculptures called Invasive Species, and my installation called Protista borosilicata, which is mostly made out of lab glassware, are based on this idea. So these are some of Jessica's pieces. That's through the window at AAAS. And then this is some of my test tube guys. These microscopic sea creatures are changing the ocean's ecosystem in ways that may profoundly affect the Earth. And ways that, people are studying, but it's still pretty open-ended what's going to happen. I mean, when some species suffer, others thrive. And global warming is extremely good for jellyfish, apparently. So if you're a jellyfish, well, you might be very happy. We might end up eating a lot of jellyfish. Jellyfish may end up eating us. And that kind of uncertainty about the future is really reflected also in Ellen's wax and pigment sculptures, which are called unidentified specimens. And these are her imagining of what completely unknown creatures scientists may find beneath the ice as it melts. And I think that there are also sort of metaphors for that, not only the fear of the unknown, I mean, there's definitely a certain edge of fear of that, but also that excitement of discovery. So it's kind of the unknown aspect. And then this is my piece, Culture Dishes. These are the watercolors inside Petri dishes. It's more about what we do know and how we know it. And these are largely based on specific findings, changes in the populations of different microbes that are, changing due to global warming, and sort of celebrating what science can tell us. So going from the microbial to the human scale, this is Jessica's piece called In the Balance. And that looks at the effect of climate change on native Arctic people. This is based on a kind of traditional boat called an umiak, which has been used for generations in the Arctic. And it's a flat, shallow boat, and it's not really suited for the kind of waves that they're now getting in the Arctic because of climate change. So waves can just turn these boats over. So, obviously, in the balance, people's lives are in the balance, but also these whole traditional cultures that are based on this climate that is now disappearing are in the balance. So in general, this whole show, does anybody know what this line means? This was what we chose as our sort of totem for the show. Any guesses? Exactly, it's ice extent over 30 years. Our art in Voyage of Discovery is trying to provide a different perspective, a different kind of way of knowing about climate change. The data are obviously important, but getting the feeling with the data is very important, and putting this across in a way that means something to people. Alan Alda spoke at the AAAS meeting last week, and he said he feels like science should be done without emotion, but it should be explained with emotion. If you want the data to have impact and to really affect people, you need to explain it with emotion. And just yesterday in Scientific American, a blogger named Jen Christensen put it in a way that I could not improve on. She said, we shouldn't just visualize our data, we should visceralize it. Thank you. Thursday.